Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. Jim Brett of the New England Council. I hope you all continue to be safe and healthy and getting some time to relax during the summer months. Knowing that many of you are already going to be taking some much-needed vacation time, we lightened up our calendar a bit this month, but we do have a few other programs planned. On Friday this week, we're honored to have the India's ambassador to the United States, who will be speaking to the New England Council about the importance of our relationship. Next week, on August 20th, we'll hold our sixth installment of the very popular and well-received Leading in a Crisis. And we're going to look at reopening of our K through 12 schools amid the pandemic. And panelists will include the CEO of the Children's Hospital here in Boston, a former chairman of the Boston School Committee, who is also a current member. We have several other child mental health and development experts who will also participate. And we look forward to having all of you join us for this important session. But today, we are delighted to welcome an incredible advocate for not only his state, for the region, and for our country, and that's Rhode Island Junior Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Many of you know he's serving his third term representing the Ocean State, and he's the former Attorney General of Rhode Island. He's also the former United States Attorney of Rhode Island. Needless to say, his legal and law enforcement background has served him well in the Senate, where he's a senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The senator also serves on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, where he has been a champion for renewable energy resources like offshore wind, and one of Capitol Hill's most outspoken voices on the need to aggressively combat climate change. When we first scheduled today's program, we all thought that the senator would be home in Rhode Island for a August recess. Alas, that is not the case. He's joining us today from Washington, where negotiations are ongoing for a fourth major COVID relief package. I don't know how much negotiations are going on. It seems to continue to drag on, but the senator nevertheless is fortunate to be down there advocating for all of us. Maybe he can give us an update on the negotiations, what he hears, what he'd like to see in a compromise package, and where it all stands. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Many, many people from Rhode Island are on the call today. So with that, I want to introduce our guest, the Honorable United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.
Jim, thank you very much. It is great to be back with you and with the New England Council again. We're not in our usual room at the Biltmore having a nice breakfast.
Yeah.
And I can't see all the familiar, friendly faces. But Zoom is second best, and it's good to be with you. I want to leave as much time as I can for your members' questions. So let me just give a quick overview on where I think we are in the negotiations. Pressure was building on the Republicans to move towards our bill. The McConnell bill was described by the President Trump, as semi-irrelevant. It probably would have trouble commanding the votes of half of Mitch McConnell's caucus. So he doesn't really have much of a position of strength. And we believe very strongly that even if we passed his bill as written, it wouldn't do much to stave off the economic consequences of COVID that are coming. It wouldn't do enough to make sure we could reopen schools safely, and it wouldn't provide the testing and tracing and the way to address the pandemic directly as a public health phenomenon. So we're not very interested in that, and we don't think it would work, basically. So we've been in a position of, we believe that they're going to come towards us at some point. They've had trouble figuring out what their position is. Mitch McConnell has one position. Meadows, as chief of staff, has a different position. Mnuchin at Treasury, who was successful in negotiating the last one, has yet another position. And McCarthy, the former Tea Partier, who's now the House Minority Leader, has a different position close to Meadows. But they can't really sort it out amongst themselves, and they're all terrified that Trump's going to make a sudden lunge in some direction and they won't be there. So there's paralysis on the Republican side, and that we hoped would break either when Trump got fed up and picked Mnuchin or somebody to be his delegate and really get involved, or that a bunch of Republican senators came to Mitch and said, look, this is ridiculous, Mitch. If you don't get something going here, we're going to start negotiating directly with the Democrats. We're going to be a gang of 7 or 10 or 14 or whatever it is, and we're going to start this process off. So when the president did his executive orders, that kind of stalled that process. And to use an old analogy, it kind of threw a new fish up on the porch. And we're going to just have to let that fish sit on the porch for a little while to see how it goes. I think it's going to start to stink pretty soon, and we'll revert to where we are beforehand, which is we've said we'll shave $1 trillion off of where Nancy Pelosi started. What's your counteroffer? And theirs has been just, nothing so far. So we continue to believe that the pressure will mount and that there will be serious negotiations, and they can start literally any day, although probably take a couple more days for everybody to understand how ineffectual the executive orders were. And then I hope we do something good that is as effective as the last round was. If you just look at Rhode Island, we got nearly $2 billion in PPP and emergency loans. Actually, that's just the PPP loans. We got another $500 million in the emergency loans. The hospitals got kept afloat by funding that poured in through HHS. The individual payments to families made a huge, huge difference. And while 12 to 14% unemployment, which is what we're looking at, is not a good thing, you can imagine what a catastrophe it would have been had not the federal government intervened so strongly at that time. So we think that the doctrine of too little, too late is really dangerous and very applicable here, and are going to try to hold on for a little while to see if they'll actually come to the table in a serious way. And if and when they do, I think we've got a very good bill that we could produce very quickly.
So Meadows and McConnell and the Speaker, they haven't met since Friday night.
No, I think Meadows left town, and McConnell hasn't been attending the meetings anyway.
Right. Yeah. So you're looking at it thinking that it's going to be another several days before they actually get together again?
Yeah.
Or weeks?
I think probably next week they'll get together again.
Yeah. And what would you like to see in that, in the Senate version? I know what the House did with the 3.4 trillion. And now they've said, we're willing to go and compromise at 2 trillion. And obviously McConnell and the Republicans are saying, no, we're staying at the 1 trillion. What would you like to see in that?
Yeah, well, obviously we need to try to keep businesses going, particularly small businesses, and the programs that were run largely through the SBA were helpful at that. I think that there's a solution on the unemployment money that could be achieved if the larger deal were to come together. A huge concern that I have is for state and municipal budgets.
Right.
Particularly right now, when police officers are stressed by the extra duties they have in COVID, fire and EMT people are stressed by the extra duties they have in COVID. Schools have incredible new burdens they have to carry as they try to figure out how to open. In many parts of the country, counties and cities run the hospitals, and the hospitals have taken a beating.
Right.
So I think there's a really dire situation at the state, county, and municipal level that needs to be addressed, or we're going to have a real catastrophe on our hands of, failure of municipal debt, massive layoffs, really a dire situation. So that, I think, is probably the centerpiece, at least for me, making sure that there's a very significant fund to tide states, municipalities, and counties through, because that tides everybody else through once they're up and running and can keep doing what they need to do. Mm-hmm. When the garbage is piling up on the streets, it's not
right.
good.
Yeah, and some of your colleagues on the other side just seem adamant and not giving any additional state and local finance because they feel as though you're giving it to a mismanaged state, and that's just not the case. so many cases, so many of the states, and all of them in New England, will say to you how much they have lost due to the COVID pandemic, not because of mismanagement. It's because of the COVID, and you just mentioned it. It's the hospitals. It's the colleges. It's the school. So I don't understand where they say, well, we're only going to give it to states that have been poorly mismanaged and they have a serious unfunded pension liability. That has nothing to do with it right now. This is talking about keeping people employed, keeping the hospitals running. I mean, hospitals are bleeding right now. They're bleeding financially. So I don't understand why they don't say we have to give some relief. And if we don't, what we're going to have is furloughs are going to be followed by termination, and you're going to have a higher unemployment rate. I don't think a lot of the senators who are running for re-election would like to see that in the newspapers.
Well, that's why we see those Republican senators, the 20 or 25 who are willing to do something, and the president himself, whose name is going to be on the ballot and want somebody, at least I hope he doesn't want calamity. You know, I think at some point they're going to look at the sort of toxic negotiating strategy and position and personnel that they've put into this mess and realize, wait a minute, this is not going to work with these people. Actually, one of them, Mnuchin, has a record of success. And so, but, you know, Meadows and McCarthy have never done a deal in their lives. They've always been Tea Party, Freedom Caucus people who like throwing bombs from outside. And I'm not sure they know how to adapt to being chief of staff and minority leader in a big negotiation.
It seems the one red line that Senator McConnell keeps talking about is liability protection. I want to see that in the bill. Do you hear anything from your colleagues to say, wait a minute, we might address that in a temporary, safe harbor type of legislation for the businesses that are abiding by all of the, the CDC code of health regulations?
No, there's no effort to try to ameliorate that particular thing. And if you look around, you've got schools that don't know how to open. You've got hospitals that are in dire financial distress. You've got municipalities and counties and states trying to figure out how to balance budgets that are really almost unbalanceable without massive savage cuts. And in the course of all of that, we've had the experience of reopening, and businesses have reopened readily. In fact, in most places, they reopened too readily and created a second wave of pandemic. So this is kind of an imaginary problem for Mitch to have hitched his horse to. And the fact that it's not front of mind for people in real life, and the fact that his position is so extreme on it, it almost looks like this is a toll gate that he wants to go through for some big donors rather than a serious response to a serious crisis.
And with the president's actions over the weekend, issue an executive order on, I guess he's going to suspend the payroll tax. He wants to do something on moratorium on evictions. Is that legal? I always thought Congress was the authorizing party to authorize funding, and yet he's going to do some of this. Can you explain what that has done to the negotiation?
It stalled the negotiation while everybody has a chance to take a look at it and see what a difference it makes. It's just a new thing to watch for a while and see what it does. I don't think it's going to do much of any good. If you look at the payroll tax, first of all, a lot of employers aren't going to want to stop collecting the payroll tax because they're obliged if they don't collect it. Now they've got to go back to their employees for it or pay it themselves. So it's an additional burden on the employers possibly. Then you've got to go back one way or the other. When it's over, you've got to go back and refill Medicare and Social Security. Otherwise, what you've done is raid Medicare and Social Security. And that's not a great look for the president going into an election in which so many of his supporters are in the Medicare and Social Security stage of their lives. It's burdened with legal troubles and problems that will probably be sorted out. So it's a mess, and it'll take weeks in best case scenario to sort through it. And we don't have weeks. So they really ought to just come back to the table. And I hope that will soon look like to everybody the kind of negotiating strategic nonsense that it looks like to us in the Senate.
Right. I know he talked about something along the lines of an executive order and suspending, the college debt for many of our students. You just filed a student debt relief bill with Sherrod Brown. Can you talk about the bill? I've read it briefly, but it gives an opportunity for people if they've had some serious economic loss of revenue due to pandemic virus, as well as some serious medical bills that have occurred in the last couple of years, that there'd be an opportunity for them to file the. Can you talk about the?
We've done two. We've done a proposal to postpone collecting student debt and postpone interest piling up on student debt until the COVID situation is squared away. It really doesn't help very much to offer an unemployed person with a big college loan a $600 added federal benefit and then take it right back in paying off their federal loan at a time when we're desperate to get money into the economy and not suck it out of the economy. And these are probably good loans. They'll be paid anyway, so a deferral period makes a lot of sense. The second issue relates to medical bankruptcy. And the bankruptcy laws, when they were reformed, so-called reformed some years ago, were very unkind to medical bankruptcy and treated somebody who goes bankrupt because an avalanche of medical bills fell on their heads, just the way they would somebody who'd gone gambling in Vegas or couldn't keep their credit card under control or whatever, requiring counseling and things like that. Give me a break. So we wanted to make sure that in medical bankruptcy, you have a smoother process to try to clear your debts. And a second piece of that reform was that you couldn't clear student loan debt. So we wanted to undo that because student loan debt shouldn't be treated differently, I don't think, than other debt, particularly in a situation where the bankruptcy is completely unplanned and completely unavoidable, because you never know when some terrible illness is going to befall you.
And what are the chances of these bills? I mean, are you getting broad, bipartisan support?
We'll see. There's always the wheeling dealing when negotiations resume, there'll be some wheeling dealing and some, balancing that needs to be done on the next COVID bill. There's usually kind of an end of year wrap up of people who want to take things that aren't all that controversial and package them together and get it done before the Congress expires and they've got to go back to square one. And then with any luck, we'll have a new administration that will be more interested in, taking care of folks like this. And that gives us a new opportunity in the next Congress.
I have a couple of questions here from some of your constituents that have asked us to ask you. Do you see the allowance for bonus pay for direct care workers from the House HEALS Act included in a compromise bill? This was given to us on behalf of Community Resources for Justice.
Yeah, I think that's too early to tell. It's obviously a House priority. It's something that comes up in our conversations in the Senate all the time. What the deal ends up looking like, it's just very, very early to tell. One thing that I would tell everybody is that if you look at the array of different specified funds that is in the HEROES Act, and if you're trying to allow the Republicans to have some face-saving victories at not allowing that help to come through, then one way to do that is to not fund those specific programs, but add money to the state, municipal, and county fund so that Governor Raimondo has the resources to step in on some of these issues so that, the city of Providence or the town of Bristol have the resources to do things that they need to do, particularly with respect to education and so forth. So anybody who is interested in a specific program that is currently in the HEROES bill or some new specific program that they're advocating for should just have in the back of their mind that there's a possibility that the state, county, and municipal fund becomes the repository for a lot of that, adding considerable, on the good side, flexibility to governors and mayors who have to respond, and on the less good side, meaning that money may not be dedicated to that particular purpose in every location. But that's a real prospect out there, I believe, and I think advocates should prepare for that and make sure communicating with the governor, the local county government, if there is that, and the local municipality to make sure that they're in the conversation should a big state, municipal, and county fund come through.
There's a question from the Carpenters Union, Local 330. The House passed the HEROES Act, included the Give Retirement Options to Workers, or GROW Act, a bipartisan proposal for a modernized multi-employer pension benefit. What are the chances that this proposal might be included in any compromise package that might move forward? You sort of touched on it already.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece of legislation. It particularly helps the Midwestern unions that have had very significant funding problems and a lot of bankruptcies by the employers and so forth that have dried up the pension funds. It is not favored by all unions. In fact, to fund that, it lifts requirements for other unions that view themselves as solvent. And so I think there are some issues that need to be worked out before that gets resolved as a top priority for anybody on our side. We'll just have to see how that goes. Clearly, these Midwestern pensions are a crisis for the people who worked their lives honestly, contributed, did everything that they should do, but other people did not do what they should have done. And now they're having to pay really terrible consequences in their personal lives of not having the health and welfare plan and pension benefits that they expected and earned. So it's a real problem, but we got a lot of different ways to solve it. And if we can't solve it here, it's going to be a continued priority. But it would be helpful, I think, if we could get to a place where the entire labor movement was supportive of a solution, and this doesn't take us there yet.
Okay. Is an energy and environment question. As you know, Ørsted owns and operates the Block Island wind farm and just constructed the two-turbine coastal Virginia offshore wind farm, the first in federal waters. Offshore wind is expected to create some 82,500 jobs and $57 billion in investment in the United States this decade. However, at the moment, there are multiple projects pending before the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management at the Department of Interior, including Ørsted's Rhode Island Revolution Wind Project, that have yet to be taken up for review. Only by beginning the NEPA process can we ensure that all stakeholders' voices are heard and ultimately build the best projects for all involved. Will you and your colleagues from Rhode Island delegation speak to the Secretary of Interior, Bernhardt, about removing the hold from pending projects and start the public review process?
So we have been very involved in this all along, from the very beginning, helping with deepwater wind to cut the Gordian knot of offshore wind siting, which Rhode Island succeeded at. We're very proud of that. And we're super proud that Ørsted has come into Rhode Island. They are incredibly welcome, and we're delighted that they are here. And we look at the possibility of all this offshore wind energy in our waters and up and down the mid-Atlantic as a huge economic development opportunity, a really, really significant one and important in the fight against climate change. So there's a lot of great stuff happening in this space. Unfortunately, BOEM, the Interior Department subset that regulates offshore energy, has long been focused on the Gulf of Mexico and on the oil and gas industry. And they do not have much of a skill set outside of doing what the industry in the Gulf tells them to do. So dealing with the new problem of offshore wind in the mid and northeastern Atlantic states was, they did not do a good job of it. And I have already spoken to the Secretary about this, and we are pursuing BOEM constantly. And at this point, given how much of a mess they've made of the preparation for this new form of licensing, I find it hard to believe that they'll get out of their own way before November. And it may be simply prudent just to wait for November and then start working with a new administration to put people into BOEM in charge of offshore wind who know what they're doing, who want to get this done and have a proven record of success, and then turn the key that lets this enormous economic engine start to roll. But at the moment, whether it's incompetence or whether it's some desire to not have offshore wind proceed because it replaces natural gas facilities, it has been a nightmare to try to work through this with BOEM.
Mm-hmm. Another energy question. You've been public and focused on the importance of reducing emissions, carbon footprint in the aviation sector. Sustainable aviation fuel will be critical to reducing emissions in the aviation sector and reducing conventional emissions burden in disproportionately impacted communities near airports. But existing policies do not adequately incentivize SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel production. What policies would you suggest to create long-term demand signal for this industry to spur investment in this sector?
Price on carbon. The International Monetary Fund calculates that not putting a price on carbon and allowing the fossil fuel industry to export all of the harms that it causes to the rest of the economy and not have that baked into its price is about a $600 billion, with a B, $billion annual subsidy. So if you want to know why the fossil fuel industry fights so hard in Washington and is such a behemoth, they're protecting a $600 billion subsidy. That's the biggest subsidy probably in the history of humankind. So that's a pretty uphill struggle for everybody to fight against. If you want to narrow it more to the airline industry, you could require offsets and require airlines to purchase offsets for the harm that they cause when they burn the fuel that they do to travel us all around. And the most immediate step and the very easiest one would be to make sure that all airlines allow passengers to buy offsets if they want through the ticket price, through the purchase, because a lot of people fly on business, they fly on government, and if you don't have an offset that's baked into the way you buy your ticket, then people can't take it up. Unfortunately, the airline industry has not been helpful in any of those areas. Individual airlines have been quite good and have made offset promises for the future, and some offer passengers the ability to pay for their own offsets. But the airline industry as a whole has not moved and was highly intransigent in the last negotiations on this subject. So those would be the three goals. And the first one is really not even a goal. It's so little. It's something that they should readily do on their own. And the fact that they were intransigent even about that sent, to me at least, a very bad signal.
The Trump administration has reversed a number of Obama-era environmental regulations aimed at combating climate change. If Vice President Biden wins this fall, what would be your top priorities in terms of environmental protection that you'd like to see reinstated?
Well, I think you need to go back and reinstate the social cost of carbon. And you can more or less sweep through a lot of the administrative regulations that the Trump administration tried and failed to undo, and reinstate those. I think the executive orders in this space, you can go back to those. And I think all of that should be more or less of a day one proposition. And then we can start to get to work legislatively on what we need to do, which is to have a serious piece of climate legislation that transitions to a green energy economy and that unloads off the rest of the economy that huge subsidy for fossil fuel. And I think that has to have an infrastructure component to it as well, because if you look at the map of Rhode Island in 40, 50 years, if we don't get this right, and even if we do get it right, the stuff that we already have baked in, there's going to have to be an enormous amount of work done to protect coastlines, to adapt to coastlines that can't be protected, to help businesses and people and facilities and beaches and so forth that aren't sustainable any longer, that won't survive or ride out a storm or a high tide. It's going to have to be a very significant priority. None of those expenditures would be necessary if we had been responsible about this in the last 20 years. But unfortunately, we have not been responsible in the last 20 years. And so there's a massive, massive load of investment that we're going to have to put out there just to try to keep status quo for people who live near coasts, people who live near where wildfires erupt. It's pretty much ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm. Got a question here for infrastructure. The Environment and Public Works Committee, on which you serve, unanimously passed a bill to provide $287 billion of surface transportation programs and the reauthorization of that FAST Act over a year ago. However, 3 other Senate committees need to take action before a replacement to the FAST Act can reach the floor. Do you see that happening before the September 30 expiration date of the FAST Act? Is an extension the most likely outcome at this point?
It's hard to tell. I don't know what Mitch McConnell's thinking on this is. This is legislation that is very, very heavily the province of EPW. The other committees could readily waive jurisdiction if they wanted to and let Mitch bring it to the floor. And he could tell his chairman that this is what he wanted to do. And I suspect his chairman would do it. And then you can work on the floor in the manager's package to get what those committees want done. So there was already path to the floor for a year for this bill, and Mitch McConnell refused to take it. I think that's frustrated our chairman, John Barrasso, a little bit. He's in leadership, so he's not going to quarrel too much, but he has continually harped about how we have a bipartisan bill that passed a very divided committee unanimously, and there's plenty of work that needs to be done, so why aren't we doing this, folks? So I think, John has actually been a pretty good ally in all of this, except that he has been unable to get Mitch McConnell to allow it to come to the floor. And that's particularly annoying because we've had so many dead floor weeks with nothing going on in which we could have brought this to the floor. So yeah, it's a considerable frustration. And again, the 3 options are: we work something out and try to get it to the floor on its own, it goes into an end of year package, or we do a fast reboot and a new administration and move forward. One way or the other, one of the key first tasks of a Biden administration is going to be a very significant infrastructure bill. Even if we pass this one, there will still be more to do. So we're going to be doing this anyway early next year if there's a President Biden.
Well, I remember the president saying some time ago he'd love to see a big $2 trillion infrastructure bill. And all of a sudden, it seems like it was off the table. And I said, boy, that was a good sign that the president is saying that, hey, let's work together and get a $2 trillion infrastructure. But it didn't seem to percolate up with the Republican leadership of either the House or the Senate. So it seems like it's not a priority, apparently.
Well, they spent the $2 trillion on tax cuts for big corporations and for wealthy individuals, and I think that sort of absorbed their $2 trillion.
Well, I'll tell you, if you did an infrastructure bill, not only do you address the public safety of the bridges, the highways, and broadband and dredging, but you're going to create thousands and thousands of jobs. And boy, do we need now more than ever. So this infrastructure, if you did it, would be the biggest jobs bill that Congress has done in decades. So I don't understand.
And particularly for rural America, which is sort of the Trump heartland, they need broadband, they need improved grid, they need better roads, they need all sorts of telehealth type capabilities. All of that arguably is infrastructure. And you could really change the quality of life for rural families around the country, the people who consider themselves forgotten by all of us on the coasts and in the cities, with the right kind of big infrastructure bill. And that's why I think it's going to be a really important Biden priority, because it is the kind of thing that can tie the country together. And we need to do things that we agree on and that tie the country together, that make us proud of our infrastructure, and proud of what America presents to visitors.
I think there are some 12 million children that do not have access to broadband, and now that we're asking, these children to study at home, it just doesn't make sense. You think that they would say address this, but
and as rural schools close, need more telehealth for families. So I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah, along the lines of that surface transportation bill, the House passed that key 1.5 trillion infrastructure in early July. I think they called it the Moving America Forward Act. But apparently the majority leader has indicated he's not likely to bring it up in the Senate. So is that pretty much dead for the year?
Yep.
Okay. I don't want to expand. That's good. Judiciary. Last week, the U.S. Court of Appeals in District of Columbia ruled that Congress can sue to have former White House counsel Don McMahon testify before them. Do you believe that Mr. McMahon will ultimately testify before the House Judiciary Committee, which issued that subpoena, to hear from him? And also, what sort of example does this set for the future administrations who may seek to prevent officials from testifying before the United States Congress?
Yeah, I think he will, and I think that's where the law is going to fall. The doctrine that the Trump administration has pursued is a doctrine called absolute immunity, which says that if you're a zone more or less anywhere near the president, no member of Congress can ever ask you any question. You don't even have to show up. That has gotten blown out by pretty much every court that has looked at it. It stays alive in the halls of the Department of Justice in a tiny little office called the Office of Legal Counsel that continues to propagate this absolute immunity mythology, but it has no footing outside of OLC and a couple of, rightward leaning think tanks. Courts just don't accept it. And if you look at the rest of the law in this area, even something as sacrosanct as attorney-client privilege, you can nevertheless get attorneys to have to testify in relation to matters in which they were the attorney for a client. You just can't ask them about the attorney-client protected stuff. I did this as U.S. attorney when I got legal fees back from lawyers who had taken like gold bars from a criminal in payment on the basis that, oh, come on, you're picking up gold bars, you're picking money out of the back of a trunk in a parking lot in a airport. That's not ordinary getting paid. You are now aware that these are proceeds of a crime and we're entitled to get those back. And so the zone doesn't even exist for something as important as the attorney-client privilege. And I think there clearly are communications between the president and his staff that are and should be protected, but the idea that he doesn't even have to show up is outlandish.
Mm-hmm. Earlier this summer, both the House and the Senate advanced proposals aimed at reforming policing in light of a number of very disturbing incidents of police brutality against people of color. Unfortunately, those efforts have come to a stalemate at this point, with the Republican-controlled Senate and the Democratic-controlled House unable to find common ground. What will we see on action on this issue before the election, if any?
I honestly don't know. Mitch McConnell has shown no appetite to convene any kind of bipartisan effort on a bipartisan bill. It would be quite easy to pick 5 people on each side and say, hey guys, sit down, see what you can work out. And if you can work something out, we can try to get it passed. He has not indulged that. The Judiciary Committee had a hearing on this, a good hearing on this, and then has moved on to other issues. So Chairman Graham has apparently lost interest, although that could revive. So I think this may have to wait until next year. One thing that I do want to say on this issue as a Rhode Islander is that having worked as a U.S. attorney, worked as attorney general, been deeply involved in law enforcement as governor's legal counsel as well, I've got a long history with law enforcement in Rhode Island, and we in Rhode Island are in a far better position than most places on this issue because of the leadership of community organizations and because the leadership of law enforcement organizations, and how for a long time, back to the days of community policing, back to dealing with driving while black, dealing with the opioids epidemic and trying to figure out ways around criminalizing drug abuse. We have a really good track record. We have very good law enforcement leaders, and I think we're well positioned to take the next steps in a very harmonious way, thanks to excellent community organization leadership and law enforcement organization leadership.
We just talked about a couple of bills, and you've said it doesn't look good for the infrastructure bill to pass this year, maybe not the police reform bill not to pass this year, which brings me to the issue of filibuster.
Yeah.
There are reports now circulating that should former Vice President Biden be elected president, and if the Senate flips to control by the Democrats, there'd be advocates, at least not too many people oppose the idea of eliminating the Senate filibuster for legislation. You've already done it on, executive appointees. You've done it on judicial appointees all the way up to the Supreme Court. Is this something that you and your colleagues are talking about? I noticed when I heard President Obama speak at John Lewis's funeral, he referred to the filibuster as a Jim Crow relic. And I said, maybe he's weighing in on this filibuster, that it's time to address it if they are blocking civil rights and voting right legislation.
Yeah, well, that is the unfortunate history of the real filibuster. It's the Southern Dixiecrats coming to the floor to burn enormous amounts of time to stall civil rights legislation. Since then, we've moved past the filibuster per se to the cloture rule, which requires 60 votes to get onto an expedited schedule and get a bill considered. And I would say that the Senate Democrats are spread across three categories. One is, let's get rid of the damn filibuster. The second is, that seems a little rushed and a little rash, but if we really bump up against intransigence on core priorities, let's consider it then. And then a third line of analysis, which is the Senate rules provide for a significant piece of legislation to pass every year with a simple majority through the process of budget reconciliation. And why not use the process of budget reconciliation to see how much we can get done if we can't get Republican cooperation, and use the budget reconciliation process, and that takes some of the pressure off the filibuster. And I suspect for a lot of my colleagues, it'll be easier to vote to overrule things like the Byrd rule, which constrain budget reconciliation, than they would be to overrule the filibuster rule. So as we go forward, it's not clear how this plays out, but everybody should keep an eye on budget reconciliation. Sounds like the most boring term in the entire world, but it is a side door for a big piece of legislation every year to clear the Senate on a simple majority.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of concern on Capitol Hill about the likelihood that one or more foreign powers, Russia, China, or Iran, North Korea, are looking to use cyber attacks against our upcoming election to generate distrust in the integrity of our election systems. As troubling as this is, what many Americans I don't realize that they are aware of is the countless number of cyber attacks that are being penetrated every day now on the Pentagon, other government agencies, businesses, universities, and other entities across the globe. Can you discuss your concerns about this situation? And then what is Washington going to do about it? I mean, we just read recently that Russia would love to help the president to get reelected. China, Iran would like to have the vice president reelected or elected. So your thoughts on how this is going to play out, and is it going to be an election where it's not going to be contested again because of outside interests that impacted the outcome?
Well, first of all, I don't see China taking a very big role in all of this. I think they have so much leverage with us in other arenas of competition that it makes no sense for them to stick their fingers into our election and risk getting caught and creating a whole new crisis. I think for them, our relationship is pretty challenged already, and there are plenty of vectors for them to apply pressure. So I don't see that as a big risk. The Iranians are always up to no good, but I think they're also very much at risk themselves. And I think they want to be very careful about how much they play in this space, because the consequences for them are going to be ferocious if they're caught messing around. And it's really going to be a grim situation for Iran. Russia is in a very different and unique situation. They want to play in this space. They don't mind getting caught. They don't count economically in the world because they're essentially a third world country. McCain refers to them as a gas station run by gangsters that happens to have an army. And that was not a overly cartoonish description. So just toying with us, messing with us, playing with us, Putin is very good at this, and he has a whole arena of groups that help him do this. So the Russians remain a very significant issue. And the key is that while they may try to meddle in the actual cyber processing of election results, that seems pretty unlikely and pretty unlikely to succeed. What they may do is try to make it look like they did and leave breadcrumbs so that then a defeated presidential candidate can blame his defeat on interference. And they've cooked up what they really want, which is the public crisis and the loss of confidence, not the actual attack itself. And then outside of that, they're bombarding us in all sorts of ways with messaging intended to divide and discourage the American public. And we've been lousy about that. Good marks to David Cicilline for getting after some of the big platforms like Facebook, because they've been horrible at it. They were buying political advertisements denominated in rubles. Give me a break. So I think that that's the real danger. It's a communications warfare strategy by the Russians that uses a lot of our own legal liabilities, our legal vulnerabilities against us, allowing them to hide that it's the Russians.
I think one thing you can do to assure a safe election is to give an infusion of dollars to the post office.
Yeah.
Because so many people
we've actually got bipartisan support for that. I think if we get a deal, money for the post office will be in there.
Okay, that's good to know. I have just two more questions.
If you can't run a post office, good luck in a pandemic. And that's what we're seeing an administration that can't run a post office. The post office was in the Constitution. It's been around since the founding. It's always been able to run. You have to be very specially incompetent not to be able to run a post office, and they've managed.
I have two final questions. One is on the census again. 2020 is a census year, a fact that has been in many ways overshadowed by the pandemic, the election and the civil unrest around the country due to race issues. But for Rhode Island, the outcome of this year's census is of great consequences, as the state is at risk of losing one of its two House seats. How concerned are you that this could happen? What more can and should be done to encourage residents to participate in the census? And obviously, what would be the loss of the House seat, not just for Rhode Island, but for New England more broadly?
Yeah, I'm very concerned that this could happen. The trial run that was done came back with terrible results. Right now, you're dealing with a Latino population that often feels intimidated and that it shouldn't be counted, and they don't trust that answering your census questions won't provoke some kind of other interaction that they don't want. The pandemic has people nervous and make it hard for the door knockers to go door to door and count the census. So I think there's a very significant danger of a undercount, and that does cost us a seat, which costs us clout in Congress. Right. And it also affects all the formula dollars, not all of them, but a great number of the formula dollars that flow to the states on a population type basis. So there's real money at stake for Rhode Island in particular, not just from losing a seat, but also from having our count be artificially low when it comes to grants.
Do you think the election should be a national holiday?
Yeah.
Is there any movement towards that in Congress? Anyone filing any legislation?
Not yet, but it would be a very good part of a reform package. I forget whether there's a provision on that in HR 1, the House's big reform package.
Yeah, yeah.
But if we control the Senate, and if we control the House, and if we control the presidency, I think the big reform package, a big climate bill, a big infrastructure bill, and a big tax reform are probably going to be the 4 top priorities legislatively. And in that reform bill, it would be great to have it be a national holiday.
Yeah. My final question is, yesterday, the former vice president announced his running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, as his pick. You served with her on the Judiciary Committee for several years. You also share a background as a former state AG. Your thoughts on her selection, and also any personal experiences working with her that you can share with us?
She is very bright. She is very deft. I don't think the Republicans can look forward to many rookie errors out of Kamala Harris as a vice presidential candidate. I, for one, am looking forward to the debate between her and Mike Pence. I think he will have sleepless nights realizing that he's going to have to face her in debate at some point. That I probably shouldn't say that because it's every debater's goal to lower expectations for their side. But I mean, seriously, you've seen her in action. She's really good. So I think it's a great opportunity for the country to have a ticket that looks like the country. I think she's got a lot of energy and pizzazz, and does just really well in public settings. She's also very nice privately. I think she's one of the more popular members of the Senate. And so, I'm a big 2 thumbs up on this election.
Were you surprised?
Well, I think she was seen as the likeliest candidate, both in terms of being a good communicator for where the campaign needs to go, and also being someone who survived the vetting of a presidential race, brings a big state with her, has done very well in hearings, asking questions. I think that she was the logical candidate for a long time. So and I'm both pleased and relieved that she is the choice. There's not a lot of upside in a vice presidential candidate, but there's always the possibility of a downside.
Exactly.
So, you want to avoid that downside, and I think the vice president has done this.
Yeah.
And I think that got some upside.
Right. I just want to thank you for the time. We had a great discussion, and we really discussed the range of issues, and you have an awful lot on your plate, and we just want to thank you for always being accessible and approachable for all of our members of the New England Council. And we wish you much success in negotiating a new COVID 4th stimulus bill. It's not going to be easy. The previous one seemed to have had bipartisan support. And in fact, the first one was unanimous, I believe. It's going to get more difficult, but with you there, I'm sure we'll be able to find some consensus and hopefully find some meaningful relief for an awful lot of people out there that are looking for the federal government to help them through this difficult period. So I just want to thank you again for.
We will certainly try, and I want to thank your members, whether it's universities or nonprofits or business corporations, for how you've had to adapt to this crisis and find new ways to do things. And I will work as hard as I can to make sure that we are there for you in the way that you've been there for your students and customers and the people you serve. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Stay safe. Hope to see you in person soon.
Thank you, Jim. Take care.
All right, Senator. Thank you.